While most horror franchises wait until movie 5 or 6 to go completely off the rails, Exorcist II decided that the rails never existed, and that the film simply floats on magic stardust as it takes us to Valhalla. Let's talk about a movie that has more in common with the X-Men than it does The Exorcist. Welcome everyone to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, and joining me as always is Tim.
How do you do?
How do you do? You heretic. This is a horror movie podcast. We talk about horror films here. It's really quite that simple. And we are working through the Exorcist movies this year because there's a new one coming out. Well, allegedly. This October. So, unfortunately, since we've already done the original, we now have to do Exorcist II, The Heretic, which is one of the most infamously, hated sequels of all time. This thing is it's like the butt of all jokes. It's something that comes up whenever people are talking about just trash sequels and just dropping the ball hard, things like that. So, we're going to get into it. We'll start spoiler free, if you care, and we'll get into it. I had seen this once before, many years ago. I assume you saw it before as well.
Maybe once or twice.
But I was not looking forward to it.
It's not a go-to
no,
favorite.
I remembered just being painfully bored and not having a hard time paying attention to it and just not really making much sense of it. And watching it for the show, it was kind of. I think I rewound this. Oh yeah, but it was. Wait, what did you say?
Liberating?
No, definitely not that. It was definitely not liberating. No, I had to rewind it constantly, because I felt like, wait, was I paying attention for that last minute?
You're watching the VHS, right?
No, I'm not watching it. But you can say rewind even when it's not a VHS tape, Tim. It just means going back. Okay? But I had to go back constantly because I kept was I paying attention for that last minute? Wait, did that weird thing that I thought just happened?
Why are we all of a sudden in Africa? Why is this from the point of view of a locust? What is going on?
Why is there a weird synchronized hypnotized machine? Why is this hospital for children look like it's a weird science fiction prison? Why? There's so many questions and none of it makes sense. And so I mean, yeah, the movie's garbage. It somehow does two things that typically don't go together. It's batshit insane, which normally will at least be somewhat entertaining for being crazy, and there's interesting things to talk about, and there's still interesting things to talk about from a discussion point of view, but it's batshit insane whilst being painfully boring the entire time.
No, I agree. I don't know if this is maybe a little odd to say, but I really want to like this movie because it is so weird and different and not what you would think of a sequel that part of me does want to kind of embrace that they're not just doing the typical sequel thing, which would just be oh, she's possessed again, let's get in another priest, I mean, there's possessions and exorcisms and stuff, but then
there's definitely another priest as well.
Yeah. But there's so much other weird stuff going on that I almost want to applaud it for being so strange and different, but like you said, even though it's so crazy, it doesn't work, and it's just not enjoyable to watch. And yeah, I mean, the worst something can be is just excruciatingly boring, which yeah, that's unfortunately what this is. It's nearly 2 hours, and I mean, it feels like it's 3. It's a chore to get through.
I had to go back to recheck moments so often that it probably was close to 3 hours from my view.
Yeah, I was just gonna, when we watched did the first one, I just watched it on HBO because I was too lazy to go get my Blu-rays and put them in. So I was all right, I'll just load up HBO again, and it wasn't on there. And it's makes sense. It feels no, like, even though, it's part of the series and stuff, it's like, no one is looking for it. No one's gonna watch it.
Yeah, why would Warner Brothers have all their movies on their streaming service? What sort of nonsensical idea? What crazy idea that would be?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the premise of Exorcist II is that even though it's been like 5 years since the first movie, another priest has been tasked with investigating the death of Father Merrin from the first one, and goes to see Regan, whose mother is just not here, presumably because the actress wasn't coming back for whatever reason. So Regan's staying with her like nanny from the first movie in New York, but she spends a lot of time at this experimental children's hospital, which has the craziest set designed for what it's supposed to be. I also imagine it's like a painty shoot, because I'm like, I bet they had to be so careful not to get reflections of like the crew and stuff constantly on the shot, because it's all glass. It's just glass everywhere. It's all these glass octagon rooms just all over the place. It's so weird. But he comes to see her, and through events that we'll describe in depth later, basically feels like he has to find out how to completely get rid of Pazuzu from her, the demon from the first movie, because it's still attached to her, even like, so we're just going to pretend at the end of the first movie accomplished nothing, basically. And it sets him on a trip to Africa at one point to get to James Earl Jones. It adds a lot of crazy mythology stuff, which could sound, it's probably going to sound interesting when we just say it out loud, but it's so painfully dull in the movie. And all of it...
That's what's always like so strange about it, where there's a lot of ideas in here that if you just explain to them, it's like, okay, yeah, I can... like, that sounds interesting to me. I kind of want to see this movie. But then, just the act of watching it is, not good.
And it's... I mean, I kind of agree with that to an extent, but I also feel like I don't necessarily think it fits the sequel to an Exorcist movie, just because The Exorcist is such a highbrow horror movie, and that it's taken itself very seriously, and kind of partly why it works the way it does is because it doesn't, it tries to keep things very grounded, and it's like, okay, a real character's being possessed kind of thing. Whereas all the stuff this movie introduces, it's like, this is into schlocky nonsense territory. I was reading it on the Wikipedia, actually, but this is probably a good time to whip out this quote. So apparently, when it premiered in New York, William Peter Blatty, who wrote the book in the first movie, was the first one to start laughing at it at the premiere, and apparently a lot of people laughed at it. But what I really wanted to read out was some quotes here that are in the Wikipedia from William Friedkin, the director of the first movie. So apparently he saw half an hour of the film, and this is stuff that he said about it. I was at a Technicolor, and a guy said, we've got a new print of Exorcist 2, do you want to have a look at it? And I looked at half an hour and thought it was as bad as seeing a traffic accident in the street. It was horrible. It's just a stupid mess, but made by a dumb guy. John Boorman by name. Somebody who should be nameless, but in this case should be named. Scurrilous, a horrible picture. And then later he said that the sequel diminished the value of the original and called it the worst piece of crap I've ever seen and a freaking disgrace. And he then added, the film was made by a demented mind. You know what's so funny is I looked up the director of this one, John Boorman, because I thought I recognized the name, and he directed Deliverance, so it's not like he's not made movies that are respected. He's made stuff that is critically acclaimed, so yeah, he made this weird Exorcist sequel. Not that he wrote the script by any means.
Sure. Yeah, and then who knows like how many people had their hands in it. It's a group effort to make something that bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw something in the Wikipedia that, I mean, I don't know if this, I'm assuming this is maybe, not completely accurate, but if it is, it's very funny. But they're saying that like at one of the showings, like people started chasing Warner Brothers executives down the street or something like that. Like,
I bet to know about that, but
I mean, I don't even know like how you would know who they are, but
it would have to be at like some sort of official premiere or something where you'd like it's clear who's involved with the film and whatnot. Baffling. But one of the things that Friedkin said in those quotes there that I kind of agree with is that it does kind of ruin the mystique of the first film. So obviously you would just ignore this going forward and just don't think about it. But like, if you're watching this movie, like, everything it tries to tack on, like, it's that thing where you try to over-explain stuff like this. Like, a lot of the mystique of the demon in The Exorcist is that it is, I mean, we were calling it Pazuzu because that just kind of became like a thing because of the sequels, but it works better when you don't know it's got a name. When it's just, as soon as you name it Pazuzu, it's like, well, it's Pazuzu. They're like, that's not scary. There's nothing creepy about something named Pazuzu.
Yeah, because I think when we did the first one, we were trying to remember, like, oh, do they even mention Pazuzu in this one? Like, oh, I don't know. But then, yeah, I feel like, like 30 minutes into this one, they've said Pazuzu like 20 times. Like,
oh, they chant it at one point. Yeah. There's we need to talk to Pazuzu. Pazuzu's inside her. Pazuzu's doing this. Pazuzu's doing that. Do the hokey cokey and Pazuzu all about. Yeah, they never shut up about Pazuzu. So you've got that going on. You've got like our new lead priest, Father Lamont, played by Richard Burton, who honestly is this super intense character right from the get-go. He always speaks like the world's about to end, which I actually think's the biggest problem with this movie is that there's actually nothing that there's so he's tasked with investigating the death of Father Merrin, which feels a bit late to do that now, 4 or 5 years later, but whatever. And part of it, and this could be interesting if they explored this a bit more, but part of the reason why is because his writings talked about exorcisms and the devil and all that stuff, and the church are trying to like sort of get away from the idea that a devil exists, that Satan exists for the public, so they want to try and dispel anything he ever said. Lamont goes in to investigate, and of course he actually ends up believing it all. And they also mentioned that Lamont's done exorcisms, and we'll get to the opening scene when we get to spoilers with him. But like, the first movie made it sound like, oh, like there's like one priest that knows how to do exorcisms, because most priests don't even know they're possible and don't believe they exist. And
well, it wasn't called Exorcists.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was The Exorcist. It wasn't.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Aliens hadn't come out yet, so they didn't know that they could, make bank, which is calling this Exorcists.
Exactly.
Even though technically there is 2 in the first movie, but only one's experienced.
Yeah.
So it's worth mentioning. But like, there's no threat in the movie. Like, I know that sounds strange, but like, everything that he does in this movie to try and like sort of take Pazuzu out of Reagan is all just based on the idea that he thinks that it's still in there, and he obviously kind of proves it at a certain point, but like, it's not doing anything. Nothing bad's happening to Reagan. There's no like immediate threat that something bad's going to happen to the world. There's no real threat. Like, he almost kind of like makes it the threat himself, and like I don't know, it's so weird. There's no inciting incident that makes us go, oh, like he has to, like, we have to stop this, we have to save her, and he immediately starts saying, I have to save that girl, I have to save Reagan no matter the cost. And I'm like, she's smiling and happy. In fact, Linda Blair, if I can critique her performance here for a little minute, even later on in the film, it feels like she's too smiley and happy all the time. She literally has a moment in this movie where she says to a little girl, oh, I was possessed by a demon. Oh, it's okay, he's gone now. That's a legitimate line in this movie, and she's smiling like she's in a like toothpaste commercial when she says it. So I am gobsmacked by a lot of this movie. I think I understand the broad strokes of it, but some of it's really weird, and it makes some really odd choices with how it shows scenes. There's transitions between things. There's scenes that might be hallucinations that kind of become real scenes. There's just a lot of weird things in it, and a lot of weird choices. Needless to say, I cannot recommend it, and the whole thing's kind of a blurry mess, and I finished watching it right before we started recording, which is good, because tomorrow I will not remember a freaking thing about this entire movie. It will all just go into the night.
Well, not until I hook you up to my, brain synchronizer machine.
God, this was so they've got a device. It's like a dual hypnosis device, but it basically, like, the first time they use it, like, the therapist lady gets trapped in Reagan's mind. That's in the first, like, 20 minutes of the movie. I don't understand. Why did they make these choices? Did they not understand what made the first film work, or even what type of movie the first film was? Because this feels like it's some sort of weird hypnotic art house fantasy drama.
That's like what it feels like. Like someone that worked on the script or something, like, had some, like, new age, like, like a therapy or something that they really wanted to include in it. Like, it feels like very, like, forced, and, like, some kind of quack science that, like, someone used to do it in the 70s, but, like, no one does anymore.
I'm just looking right now to see. There was a guy who wrote the screenplay for the second movie, and it takes influences from things, but it's not based on anything. Because obviously when we get to the third movie, William Peter Blatty actually came in and wrote and directed that, and that was kind of like an interesting thing, that the writer of the original book and movie was then making this sequel that obviously is going to ignore this one, because no one wanted to continue this one. No one cared. So, but I was just curious to see if this was technically based on some sort of book sequel or something, and it isn't. It's just a developed screenplay for the movie. It's kind of weird, because obviously you get Max von Sydow back. He's, like, in flashbacks, and it sort of tries to develop some of his backstory, some of which I think diminished the first movie, because it tries to set up that he already, like, faced Pazuzu when he was younger, and I'm like, I don't know, that just makes it all feel a bit cheaper. That's that thing that comic books do all the time, where they insert characters into the backstory of, like, the main character. Like, how many people show up that somehow Batman knew before he started being Batman? Like, it happens so often.
Like, one of the worst offenders of that was when Marvel got the Star Wars license, and they were like, started making all these, like, official Star Wars comics that are, like, in canon, but they would do all this stuff, like, it'd be between movies, but they would have, like, all these, like, battles with Darth Vader, and you had, like, Darth Vader, like, realizing Luke was, like, his son, like, way before, like, Empire and stuff, and it's like, oh, this is, like, so annoying. Like, you're just diminishing, like, all the important like battles and gravitas of like when these characters meet, because they've done it like 50 times. Like, at that point, you're just making like a like a Saturday morning cartoon show where, like, every week they fight the villain and then they win, and then, oh, well, see you next week, though. Like, it's so dumb.
Yeah, at a certain point, it's like they're telling you it's like canon and it's official, but it's like, nah, this is just fan fiction. It doesn't count. Like, when you're watching the movies, you're never going to think of any of that as actually happening between the movies. And if you did, it would just diminish everything that's in the movies. Yeah, absolutely. So, honestly, I don't know what more I want to say without spoilers. I want to just get into this and talk about
it's bad.
The insanity. Yeah, it's in a word, it's shit.
I guess if I was gonna give like the mildest compliment, like, I don't know, I guess there's like a few maybe like weird, I don't even really know how to describe it. Like, I don't know, like every now and again there'd be like maybe like a weird like shot or something that I was like, that looks kind of cool, but like, again, it's very very few. And in between just long bouts of nothing cool happening.
Yeah. So the opening scene, spoilers, just in case that wasn't clear. Spoilers from the henceforth. The opening scene of this movie, I thought was like a dream sequence because of how it looked. And it's Father Lamont, our main character, and this seems to be him trying to do an exorcism somewhere in Latin America, and all these people are chanting, and there's this woman who's clearly the possessed character in the scene. But she gets set on fire, and because of the effect they chose to do when she's on fire, I thought this is like a nightmare because it looks too weird and like fake or something. Like it didn't look like a real person on fire. It looked like some sort of weird artistic touch. But then it just kind of skips ahead, and it's like, oh no, I guess that just happened. Right away, it's like, okay, this doesn't have the restraint, I suppose, that the first one did. It's doing wackier things already. I tweeted out, I'm 4 minutes in and I'm already confused. And I was already confused by this. But we're introduced to Reagan at this weird medical therapy facility. Can you wrap your head around the set design of this?
No.
It looks like... Yeah, the best thing I can say is it looks like a prison from like a sci-fi movie, or maybe like...
yeah.
I guess the closest I can compare it to is maybe like in Westworld, like where they like work on the hosts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't watch Westworld, so.
Oh, fair enough. But like, it's all these hexagonal or octagonal rooms that are all just made of glass, and it's just nothing. And they've got like fancy lighting where they can kind of like dim the lighting so that like it like it's like they're surrounded by darkness when they're not really, and then they can turn the lights back up, and it's like, you know, but they're obviously not turning the lights off in all these other places in the that's open space. It's like such a weird design, and Reagan's like helping, but she's also kind of in therapy here. It's a little bit unclear exactly like what she does with her time. To be honest, it doesn't really get into it.
Maybe like she's drawn to it because she's like a natural healer or whatever.
Oh, we're getting to. Don't worry, we're getting to that. And so Father Merrin, or not Merrin, sorry, Father Lamont. Merrin's the dead one. Father Lamont comes to see everyone, and our other main character in the film is Dr. Tuscan, who is Reagan's therapist, and she wants to try something with Reagan with this fancy two-way hypnosis machine thingamajig, and she's going to be trying it the same day that Lamont's there. So Lamont sort of sits in. She doesn't really want him around at first, but then she sort of agrees. And Reagan, as far as we know right now, does not remember any of the events of the first movie, right? And that was what she said at the end of the first movie as well. She didn't remember any of it. So she hooks her up to this hypnosis thing, and then the therapist...
If she doesn't remember anything, she should watch the first movie.
I bet that sounded funnier in your head, Tim. That's effectively what happens, in the sense that the therapist hooks up to her and watches the first movie inside Reagan's head. We don't see any of this though. Later on we do get like visuals, but right at this part all we're seeing is the lights and this hypnosis thing flashing, and like Lamont standing there, and for reasons I cannot fathom, after a few minutes Reagan kind of wakes up, but Dr. Tuscan's like in a trance, and it's like she's trapped in whatever like part of Reagan's mind she was in, like, you know, because they're talking about the room she was in as a kid when she was possessed, and for some reason the assistant says, oh, like, you know, you're going to have to go back in, Reagan, and like try and get her out, and immediately, for no reason that I can fathom, Father Lamont grabs this weird, you know, headset thing that they're putting on for this and says, I'll do it, I know where she is. And then within 5 seconds of saying, I'll do it, I know where she is, he then adds on, okay, show me how to find her. What? What? You don't... You can't know where she is, but also need to know how to find... Like, those two things are contradictory statements, Father.
It was a bit cocky.
But I don't even understand why he's stepping in. Why would he think he knows how to do this? This is like newfangled hypnosis tech, which he seems very like impressed by. He's like telling Dr. Tuscan a couple of scenes time that what she's doing is going to save the world, and this is important research that's going to, you know, save humanity and some shit.
Yeah, he's got it going on with the Lord and everything, so it's pretty good of technology.
Yeah, so he sees like visions of like possessed Reagan, and he sees like visions of like Pazuzu's hand around like Father Merrin's heart, which kind of like, it's also around Dr. Tuscan's heart, because the images are kind of blurring together, kind of thing. It's like superimposed over the top.
I actually thought this looked pretty cool. I kind of like this.
I mean, in a vacuum, I guess, but it's kind of like, I don't think it really belongs as a sequel to The Exorcist. It feels too...
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I don't want this as like that has like the storyline or whatever for an Exorcist sequel, but I just mean in terms of watching the movie, like, I thought it was like a cool visual, you know, at least and it helps alleviate some of the like dullness of the movie so far.
I mean, it is pretty dull at this point, but we're not even at peak dullness. Like, most of the last half is like sleep inducing. If you want a cure for insomnia, Exorcist II: The Heretic is the movie for you. This convinces them that Pazuzu is still attached to her, that deep down it's still in there, and I think he goes away and comes back. Honestly, going through this movie in order is going to be a chore to try and do, because a lot of it's blown together. But there's a scene,
kind of like a symbiote.
There's a scene also in this same location, in the medical hospital research facility, whatever it is, where
hostel.
Shut up. Where Reagan draws Father Lamont, but puts flames around him, and then and he immediately looks at this and goes, "This feels important. I sense flames." And he immediately just walks with a purpose, and Tuscan follows him. Dr. Tuscan follows him around, and they find a fire that started in the basement area in a box, and he tries to put it out, and somehow it spreads around him so that when Tuscan looks over at him after phoning for help, he's got flames behind him, and it looks just like the drawing that Reagan drew.
Explain that.
I don't think I will. It just feels. Because after this, he's just kind of talking to her, and is this after Reagan cures the girl of autism?
I thought that was later in the movie, but
I think that might be later. Yeah, that might be later. But basically, he said. This is where I'll just explain the broad concept of the movie and what he's ultimately going to be investigating and finding out. Because it's if we just do it bit by bit, I'm just going to get confused as to the order of how they explained this. So. Father Merrin from the first movie, we find out via really weird, awkward flashbacks. And when I say awkward flashbacks, I mean, this is probably just before the fire bit, actually. Father Lamont syncs up with Reagan with this hypnosis device and effectively sees flashbacks of Father Merrin in Reagan's mind, which is kind of weird. Why are they there? I mean, I guess because it's also Pazuzu's memories, but parts of it aren't Pazuzu's memories, but whatever. He sees that in the past, Father Merrin, when he was younger, encountered Pazuzu when he was working in Ethiopia, and there was locusts. And the locusts were also something Pazuzu was doing, because Pazuzu does other things in this movie, not just possess people. That's important to know. And Father Merrin helped this young Ethiopian boy who grows up to be James Earl Jones, as we see later, but he was possessed with Pazuzu as well. And Father Merrin did an exorcism on this boy in this really sacred holy temple that's really awkwardly up this mountain that you have to climb up, this crevice between two bits of rock, and it's very it's like a journey, it's like an epic journey just getting to this holy temple, and that's where he did the exorcism. And what we find out is that this young boy had telepathic and healing properties. And throughout the film, we also find out that Reagan has telepathic and healing properties. And what this movie's getting at is that Pazuzu possessed Reagan intentionally, much like this boy, because it wanted to corrupt them and make them evil before they unlocked all of their abilities, because they're actually new types of human that exist and are going to keep coming to fight evil and save the world.
Well, you know what that tells me.
What's that?
It tells me that Pazuzu's kind of a jerk.
So, I think he also explains that his Father Merrin believed that these new psychic people will be the first soldiers in this new war, and that eventually everyone will be telepathic and we'll all just connect to a hive mind. And I'm like, what the I want to swear so bad. What the hell is this movie? What are these crazy ideas? Based on the first Exorcist movie, how did you get to all of this?
I mean, human possession, new humans. It works.
I almost sounded like New Mutants, which is honestly kind of what they are. They're like mutants.
It's not. There's a lot of X-Men vibes.
But they're like biblical X-Men because they're the new soldiers of God to fight the battles against the demons. And so Reagan's like a chosen one, much like James Earl Jones was as a kid, and that she can fight back against Pazuzu, which is essentially what happens by the end of the movie. And it's like, look, I'm not going to say there's not some interesting concepts in everything I just said, and that probably sounded quite interesting, if not good, when I just said it out loud like that. Maybe not as a Exorcist to the sequel. Sorry, a sequel to The Exorcist. This sequel does need an Exorcist, I suppose. I'll say that.
I didn't see anything that, said this is the case, but this really feels like one of those movies where they just took a totally unrelated script and was like, oh, hey, you remember that movie about like demons versus like new humans or whatever? Like, yeah, can we just rewrite that and throw in that little girl from The Exorcist and call it a day?
Yeah, because like Lamont keeps like talking as if Reagan's in danger, and she never actually seems to be in danger. And yeah, he's kind of proven at this point that Reagan is still connected to Pazuzu, but it never really feels like there's any immediate threat in the movie, which is the first thing I said, is that's the big problem with this, is that it feels like he's going off and doing all this stuff, and he's always talking very intensely, and he's saying insane things to people who don't know anything about this. He explains it to people when he's trying to, like, he's on the journey to find James Earl Jones's character, Kokumo, that's his name. He's trying to find Kokumo to learn how he was able to defeat Pazuzu, and he's just telling people that he runs into that he came here before. He flew on the wings of a demon and saw this place because that's effectively what happened. He like saw it, like Pazuzu, and at one point when this happens, Pazuzu actually straight up talking to Lamont. Like when Lamont's connected to Reagan, Pazuzu starts talking to him and showing him things, and we get these like shots of him flying through the sky and like going to this place in Ethiopia.
Wee.
What is this movie?
Like the locust cam.
The locust cam. And believe me when I tell you that all of this, despite how crazy this all sounds, it's all painfully dull and boring to actually watch.
That's like the big crime of it, is like a movie with this crazy of ideas should be far more entertaining. Like I don't know. It's almost it's almost like a feat that they're able to make it like this dull and boring while having like this insane of a plot.
I think it's just all the scenes are so slow paced and slow moving, and then there's like all the weird abstract elements that just kind of drag on and just don't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, for example, before Lamont connects up with Reagan has a dream on her own, right? She's like in bed and she's like living in this like apartment somewhere up in a skyscraper in New York, and she has this dream where you actually hear Pazuzu say, "We're going to go and find something, Reagan." I can't even remember what the exact line is, but you hear Pazuzu say something to her, and then she has the flying cam in her dream, and she sees like the locust, and she sees some glimpses of like what we're going to see later when Lamont sees stuff through her. But she sleepwalks onto the balcony, and there's this scene where she's like teetering at the edge of the balcony, and it's like she's almost going to fall over. But then when the nanny character, she's not really a nanny anymore because Reagan's more grown up, but like she's living with her, and Sharon, I think her name is, she comes out thinking that she's in trouble, and she's just sort of standing there like feeding the birds that are on the balcony. But like all of this takes like a good like 3 minutes, and it just feels like nothing but abstract nonsense and doesn't really contribute much to anything. So it's just lots of things like that. In fact, while we're on this scene, so she goes to the edge of the balcony and is almost like falling off because she's right at the edge. Her toes are like over the edge of the edge of the balcony. Did you notice like the design of like the barricade on this balcony? Like they're up like at least 20 or 30 stories because when you're looking out the window you can see all the skyline, and they're up really high in New York, and there's like gaps in the balcony just to make it look like it's got a design, and I'm like, this is the most stupid unsafe thing I've ever seen in my life. what idiot didn't just thought just do the barricade, do the banister all the way around so that no one trips and falls to their death.
You think that'd at least be like a safety requirement or something?
Yeah. And I started to wonder, is this just like how they designed the set and it's just like a movie thing, or is it no, like they found a real location and then they just duplicated it for like the parts where they have to like, you know, have her like be dangerously close to the edge and stuff. I don't know, but it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Maybe it's the sort of thing you couldn't get away with now, and this was like, oh, in the 70s, health and safety wasn't. But even if I was like choosing to move into a place and it was up high, I probably wouldn't pick a apartment up that high anyway, because I don't really like the idea of living up super high. But if I did, I would certainly not take one that doesn't have like a safety banister around all of the balcony.
Yeah, especially if you have like, obviously, you know, like you said, she's older, but like, you know, if you have like kids or anything around.
For sure, yeah. Or you're known to sleepwalk. This would be a really good reason. So I'm left baffled repeatedly, and you know, Tuscan doesn't really want this to go any further. The doctor doesn't want to go any further, but Reagan speaks to the father, to Lamont. They go to they meet up at the museum because like some of what she saw in her vision kind of matches stuff at the museum, and he's like, I'm going to go to Africa and find this guy. And when I come back, I'll tell you how we can defeat Pazuzu together. But he's so intense, because I mentioned he's telling people on his journey. Like Ned Beatty's in this movie, which I guess makes sense because he was in Deliverance. So maybe the director just like, hey, come on, have a small part. But he's like a pilot in this, and he's like flying him to you know, this where this temple is in Ethiopia. And he just turns to Ned Beatty and says, hey, yeah, I flew here before on the wings of a demon. Like, why do you keep saying this to everyone you meet? You sound like a crazy man. Like, even though you know what you mean is technically true and we understand that as the audience, no one else is what? And I don't even like, because it does this whole abstract thing where there's like a good 15 minutes of him like searching and going through crowds, and it's just all fluff. And he eventually gets somewhere where he finds James Earl Jones's character Kakumo, and he's in like,
you know, like someone should do is they should just like take that scene of him being like, I flew here on the wings of the demon, and then just like cut to like, I don't know, like one of those like reaction shots of like Jim from The Office, like, okay.
Yeah, but he finally finds James Earl Jones, and he's all tribal, and he's got this, you know, headdress on and all that, and he says, well, if you want to come speak to me, you're going to have to prove your faith and cross over this this like spiky floor. And like he's in his bare feet, and he goes to step in and he falls over into it, but then when he lands on the floor, it cuts to a normal floor, and it turns out James Earl Jones's character is actually a scientist, and they're in a lab. And I'm like, well, what
obviously,
what did Lamont see when he was coming in here? Was he hallucinating the whole time? Was this just like, I don't understand. Because then the scene just continues, and James Earl Jones like explains the locusts that he deals with, and that they're making this like docile like mother locust who'll calm the rest of the locusts down to stop the you know, to make them all friendly effectively, which is basically what Reagan does at the end by, you know, she's able to calm demonic presence at the end. So I don't know. Okay, I'm trying to make sense of it.
I'm trying to think of like, I don't know, like one of those TV shows where like the character has like a really overactive imagination, and he always has those like these dream sequences, and then other characters always have to be like, hey, hello Earth to, you know, whoever. Maybe that's what's going on with the priest here. He just like gets lost in his own little world sometimes and has to remember, oh yeah, I'm actually just in a hospital.
He's comically intense, like, because he Joe, what this movie has actually, it has the scene, you know, in every cop movie, like they can't solve the case until they get taken off the force.
Yeah.
He basically has this scene. He goes to his superior, right, his superior priest, And he's like, I need to fly to Africa. I need to go there. The evil's real. I saw it in a vision. I saw Father Merrin's death in a vision. And he says that with
damn it, Lamont, you're a loose cannon.
He says it with the most straight face, and he's like, okay, you know what? You're off duty until further notice. So you take some time off and collect your thoughts. You need prayer in your life.
Turn in your collar.
That's basically the scene. And then the next time we see him, he doesn't have his collar on anymore, but he's still investigating Pazuzu. And we see him making the same climb to get to the temple and whatever else. The whole thing is wacky as shit. And in the last half hour of the movie, I can barely explain. Like, he goes to... So, actually, when he's in Africa, Reagan gets a little ill. Like, stuff finally starts happening that makes it seem like there might be a threat. Because when he gets hit with a rock, she starts to feel ill. She's like dancing on stage, which I guess she does that. Maybe it's mentioned like once or twice in the movie that she's doing like a show or something. But she's singing and dancing on stage, and she starts to become ill. She ends up in a hospital bed at the this fancy hospital that she's been at. Like when the father gets back, they sync up to the machine again, and he ends up... Does he even sync up to the machine? He just goes into a trance. He just becomes almost possessed on his own.
Is this like when they, I don't know, decide like they need to go like back to the like house or whatever?
I mean,
and then...
yeah, he does. That's basically... In his trance, he starts just walking to like the bus station, and they get on a bus or a train or whatever to go back to Washington, to go back to the house that she was possessed in. And we get this journey with them, and he's just kind of in this weird trance the whole time. And ultimately, when they get there, like he's trying to save Reagan, but then starts to strangle her because like the demonic version of Reagan appears, like a doppelganger appears, and
Evil
tries
Reagan.
to. I mean, yeah, it ties into the whole heretic idea that tries to like lure him to the dark side and says, "No, choose this side because we can give you whatever, blah blah blah." And
This is like when she's like kind of trying to like seduce him too, like
the evil one is, yeah,
which is like I'm not sure like how old like she was when they filmed this, but it felt very icky. I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm just used to her like feeling like a young girl from the first one or whatever, but I was still like, yeah, this is gross.
I'm just trying to see where her birthday is. 59. She would have been 18 when it came out, so she may have been 17 when they shot it.
I mean, yeah, that's still like pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't... It felt gross. I
think the lack of a build-up to this and the lack of like a serious threat makes this all feel a bit weird, but I think what really makes it feel over the top and silly is that while this is all happening, this battle for Reagan's soul's happening in the bedroom, like the house starts breaking apart as if like, like the walls start splitting in two, and we've not even mentioned the fact that the therapist lady and the nanny have followed them here, but then like... Pazuzu's strength is like so powerful now that it's affecting things outside, and it makes the car the taxi cab they're in crash. The driver dies, and then immediately the nanny is kind of half possessed and just stands there smiling, kind of, and then lets herself get set on fire by the fuel from the car that's leaking. It just stands there burning.
I do think, the car crash stuff is just weird. I didn't really like this part of it, but like as a visual, like I did think it looked cool when like the house is like crumbling apart and coming down, and it's kind of just like like the just kind of leaving like just like the bed there and stuff. Like I thought it looked like cool, but I mean, yeah, I get, like you'll probably say again, like it's not what you want from the Exorcist sequel. Like I totally agree with that.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel appropriate for what you. It feels too
at least as
big
like a visual. I like thought it looked cool.
Yeah, it just feels too big and ridiculous. It feels like a completely different genre of movie all of a sudden, where they're doing all these big over the top like wacky things. Like we can't just do the same. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to just do the same thing as the first one, but that's not good enough anymore. Now it has to be the house is completely
bigger,
crumbling and falling apart and whatever else. And the end of the movie is basically just like the doctor lady's like, I now accept everything that Father Lamont's been saying, that you're special, Reagan. Protect her, Father Lamont. And the end of the movie is just like follow Lamont and Reagan like running off into the night and leaving her there before it goes to credits. The idea being that he's going off to like help her like keep developing her abilities so she can like fight, you know, or to put it in a quote from another movie, so she can go kick arse for the Lord.
Very nice.
It's a Brain Dead reference. You're welcome.
Or Dead Alive in the US.
Or Dead Alive, yes. It's got multiple titles. Damn you, Peter Jackson. How dare you make things complicated?
Still waiting for that Peter Jackson 4K Blu-ray set they promised like years ago. It's super weird. I wonder if like did they think like, oh yeah man, this movie's gonna be big and then we can do the third one like 30 years in the future when the war is raging on, and like
it does feel like it was left open for a sequel, doesn't it? It feels like they want, like the director or whoever wanted this to be like for the first part in a bigger journey that was going to have like Reagan be this like warrior against the evil. But I'm not even sure like is it even a horror movie at that point? Like if Reagan is just like fighting back like this? Yeah, it's weird. In fact, so we have to go back. We briefly mentioned it earlier, but we have to talk about the scene where Reagan cures an autistic girl, or at the very least cures her because she's mute. The girl's mute. She doesn't speak, and Reagan seemingly talks to her telepathically at first, although to us it just looks normal, like normal speaking. But then it becomes clear that the girl actually is speaking back because she's mute, and she doesn't usually do that. So then when like Tuscan comes in, and then like this girl's mother's there, they start freaking out, and the mother's like so happy and thrilled that her daughter's speaking. So I'm going to take her home to your father right now. Like he has to hear that she's speaking. And it's like, oh, she has this like divine ability. And I think at this point we've already heard about how James Earl Jones, when he was younger, had like healing abilities. So it's like, okay, we're connecting the dots here. We're getting the idea that she's also like that. But immediately Dr. Tuscan's like, oh, this is maybe dangerous for you to, I mean, this seems like a good thing, but maybe this is dangerous. Maybe you could like cause damage if you just go into people's heads like this, which, you know, isn't necessarily an incorrect statement, but this scene just struck me as really weird with how it was presented, because it's like, okay, Reagan just straight up has superpowers now, which feels tonally all over the place for The Exorcist.
Yeah. It's also just like handled like very like nonchalantly. Like it's not like, you know, they're like, oh, like there's this girl we've been working with for like, you know, it's not like it's like set up early on in the movie and then it's a thing we keep coming back to, and then like, you know, she's been trying and now she finally was able to get it. It's like she just kind of randomly goes up to this girl's like, sup, and she's like, sup, and everyone's like, whoa, wait, what just happened? Yeah, like because you could have made it like a little, I don't want to say a twist, but like have her talking to the girl, and then like you know, and I've seen other stories do this type of thing, but maybe have her find out afterwards that girl is actually mute, and then have her realize, wait a minute, that conversation was all in her head. You know? Wow. But instead the girl actually says to her, I don't speak. Like she says that when she's speaking, and it feels kind of like, okay. Sometimes like how you present the information is the most important part, and I feel like the presentation of this information just kind of like deflated any kind of like big impact the scene could have had. You know, and there's far too much of like just like cutting or like fading to like images of flying through the sky, or you know, watching locusts fly around. In some cases, a really comically like big locust that's you're looking at, or just cut to like a tribe in Africa, like chanting or doing, you know, just there's a lot of that, especially when he's like on his, when the father's actually traveling there. Like I swear, there's like 20 minutes of just sheer and utter like skippable nonsense. It's just absolutely, yeah.
You know, like they make you feel like it's this big trek, but honestly, all it does is like pad out the movie, and it doesn't. Nothing of value is really added because of it. Like once you find out he's actually just working at a lab, it's like, okay, what was that trek then? What did he actually have to climb up this mountain to get there, or was that just like part of the hallucination or whatever is going on?
All great questions.
Yeah, and maybe
find out in the director's cut.
Oh god, we're not watching any other versions of this. What are you talking about? And it also kind of feels like you know, like the first movie had the main priest who was struggling with his faith. You know, he was having a crisis of faith, and he wasn't sure if he still believed anymore. And then by the end, obviously he does, and that's how he ultimately is able to fight Pazuzu and win. This movie, we have this character who isn't necessarily struggling with faith, but doesn't feel like he's worthy of doing anything because he failed to save the girl at the start of the movie. I feel like it's very similar to like a crisis of faith, though, where he doesn't think he's like of value. I feel like, though, in this one, he just kind of, once he like realizes that Reagan needs help, or he thinks that Reagan needs help, he just kind of forgets the whole worthy or not thing.
No, sure.
I don't know. I felt like that part of it kind of got left behind, and then it became more about him possibly being tempted by the dark side as he was, you know, on his journey trying to like save her and try to figure out a way to fight Pazuzu.
I didn't really feel like he had much of an arc. There's a very clear, like, you know, emotional journey that, like, you know, the priest goes through in the first one. Like, yeah, this one is just, it's all kind of all over the place.
Not to mention, like, you know, in the first movie, the demon feels like this unstoppable force that we don't understand. Yeah. In this one, it's like, you know, he was already beaten once, like 25 years ago or whatever, and now he's been beaten again with Reagan, and Reagan's got super, like, everything about it just feels like you're taking all of the mystique and the threatening nature of Pazuzu away, because now he's just a villain who talks shit. You know, he talks shit at the heroes, but like he's all bark and no bite. Whereas in the first movie, he felt intimidating. He felt like, oh, there's this mystical force, and because we don't fully understand it, it's creepy, and we feel like we have no way to fight it. But this movie is just like, no, there is ways to fight it. Like, there's a whole like new race of people that are being born with superpowers who can fight it.
Yeah, you just gotta be born better than other people.
I don't know if I'd put it that way, but yeah. Which is not to say that I don't like. I'm not against adding mythology, and I'm not against like going down some of these paths. I just don't think it works for The Exorcist. I think The Exorcist is such a one and done story that it really should never have had a sequel.
No, not at all. I mean, you know, it's very self-contained. I mean, and also, like, I mean, you know, based on what you believe or whatever, but, you know, technically, like, you know, the first one was based on a book that's supposedly supposed to be based on a true story. Obviously, you know, that depends on what you believe and everything, but still, you know, usually stuff that's based on a true story doesn't have sequels.
I don't know if that's true anymore. I feel like there's probably a time when that was true. I think there's been enough true stories that have had sequels that it's probably,
but they're not
that rare.
Well, but they shouldn't.
They shouldn't. No, I agree, they shouldn't. But
or at the very least, you know that the sequel is not going to be a true story in most cases, I assume.
I'm fairly sure that's the case here as well, Tim.
If I did find out that, like, oh no, this one was actually based on a true story too, I'd be like, all right, I gotta know more about this.
True. The only true story that this may be based on is someone taking a shit ton of LSD and thinking they're flying to Africa and like fighting demons with the help of a leopard or something. Like, like I really can't get across just how slow moving most of this movie feels like, and I think part of it is that because Reagan doesn't really have much of a story, and that she's always present and she's always kind of like, oh, the demon's connected to her. She doesn't really have a story on her own. It's following Father Lamont instead. And he's so one note in how he is that he you know, right from the get-go, he's very intense. He's always taking things very seriously. The first time he talks to Dr. Tuscan, he's like really kind of, you know, stern about what he's there for and how important it is. You know, if anything, it feels like he should come in just kind of like, okay, I'm here to investigate this, and, you know, I don't necessarily think I'm going to find anything. Like, have him like take it more seriously as it goes on, but he's already at 11, but before he even sees anything, it's kind of weird. And yeah, like, it kind of has an arc, but fundamentally, I think the movie, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it does suck. But the movie, oh god, what do you call it when you like put things in front of something to obscure? No, the movie, Yeah, obscures. That's the word I'm looking for. The movie obscures it so much with how it tells the story that it never really. I don't think you ever really connect with it, and I think.
Oh no, not at all.
Like, I had to try really hard to pay attention to a lot of this movie, and like I said earlier on, I was constantly going back a minute to like rehear scenes, to just make sure I got what it was saying in the moment, because it is it's so easy to let your mind wander when this one is playing, because it does not keep your attention at all. And I remember feeling that way the first time I watched this. So the first time I watched this, I probably did drift my attention, and I probably didn't like take all of it in. This time I did take all of it in, and I don't really feel any better about it. If anything, I'm more mad at it.
I'll be honest with you. I really have to pee. Do you wanna take a break, or do you just want to wrap it up right now?
I mean, I think we were getting to. I mean, unless there's other stuff you want to talk about.
Unless it's about how bad I have to go to the bathroom. No.
All right, then. I guess we'll rate The Exorcist II, Heretic. Tim, what do you want to give the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go high at all. I guess I'll give it a 2. Just, you know, and that's just because to me there's like some like interesting ideas that it's at least kind of interesting to maybe think about and wonder what they were thinking when they made it. And there's like a few cool visuals here and there, but I mean that's really it. Otherwise the movie is just such a stinker. It's so boring. There's no like you know, the first one, I don't know, just has such like a creepy atmosphere. There's like nothing interesting or creepy about this at all. It's a lot of times it feels like you're getting whiplash because it's going from like so many different things to another. Like there's so many like plot lines you could easily, you know, do an exorcism on it and get it out of there. But yeah, no, I mean, it sucks again because it is so kind of strange and off the beaten path that I almost do wish I could kind of champion it, because that, you know, it's sometimes it's nice when they do that, but I mean, despite how kind of weird and bizarre a lot of the storyline is, it's not fun or wacky or interesting to watch at all. So it's, yeah. I mean, now that we've done it for the show, I don't know if I'll ever really want to watch it again.
I agree. So I'm going with a 2 as well. I think 2 is the number. It gets a 2 because at least there's some technical proficiency, and you know, James Earl Jones is always nice to see. Like, I mean, that's basically that's all I've got for you. Do you know that hypnosis machine they used? It had this like weird ringing noise, and I felt like there was a couple of times where it would be in like a really intense like dream sequence where they're seeing demonic stuff or flashbacks, and then it would cut to them waking up with a hypnosis device, and it would do this like sort of like ring, and it was like, oh my, like, what are you doing, movie? It's like you're trying to ruin any attempt at your atmosphere. So but yeah, everything that's already been said, it's dull and meandering, and despite the fact that it should sound like it's at least interesting, it somehow it ruins all of it with just dour characters, dour direction. Yeah, so there you go. Exorcist II, the Heretic, cannot recommend it. So obviously we will be back in the near future with Exorcist III, which does have a lot more of a cult status. People do quite like the third one, so we'll get into it. Tim's signaling because he wants to go pee.
Wrap it up.
I'm wrapping it up. All right, so if you want to support all the content, you can head over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us for any amount, but obviously the $3 tier you get access to all the past bonus episodes. $5 tier you get access to all the Even More Streams episodes. They're on break just now, but there's a back catalogue. You get bonuses for other shows that are on the Mail Fuzz movies, like the Atomic Cinema Experiment and the Collector's Cut. So please do that. You can also, of course, support us for free by liking, subscribing, and dinging the bell for notifications, and sharing us out on social media or wherever. You can get us on Twitter at Screams Midnight. And just before I say the final goodbye, I'll thank our Patreon producers for the month. So thank you to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, David Sharp, Boorman, Christopher Moy, David Brown, and Al Treisman. Thank you to everyone who supports us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, and we will see you next time.